Today, we're breaking down not just the new episode of Helluva Boss Full Moon, but really the relationship of Blitz and Stolas both on screen and behind the scenes. My name is Impcut, hit that subscribe button, and stay tuned for the end of the video to learn how I got my scars. Now, to start, we need to address the obvious spoilers in the room from the most recent episode. Most of the episode focused on the cherubs and dorks teaming up together to try and take down Blitz. This was all just to set it for a later episode, as the recent teaser had a shot of Blitz interacting with the dorks through his Osmodian Crystal's portal. This is something he only got at the very end of this episode, so already this season we will see this plot continue. The real kicker for this episode, however, was the very end, where Blitz and Stolas finally broke off their arrangement, and unfortunately really broke up their relationship as a whole. Stolas had hoped that by ending their arrangement, they could actually have a real relationship, but things went south when both sides refused to really hear what the other was saying. This was unfortunate, and we're gonna break down every little moment in their interaction, but I need to address how the characters got here, because from what I know, this was not the intended story of Stolas and Blitz when Helluva Boss was first being developed. Now, the show has been building to this breakup and its inevitable fallout for a while now, but originally, the show was apparently meant to be a lot different. Originally, from what I understand, Helluva Boss was not so focused on this romance, and instead, the relationship between Blitz and Stolas was a lot more toxic. Originally, Stolas and Visago even were supposed to be overlords in the Pride Ring for Has-Been Hotel, two demons who ruled industries that would have appeared in the sister show based on their quick cameos in the pilot. Blitz, Moxie, and Luna could also be seen in the Has-Been Hotel pilot, and were said to have originally been planned as troublemakers for the hotel. When working on a second show in the same universe, VivziePop was said to move the characters to Helluva Boss because Has-Been Hotel was already crowded with cool side characters, with Millie being created to round out the cast. Stolas in the pilot seemed to have a more villainous aura to him. Blitz had to sleep with Stolas in order to get the grimoire still, and he was going to keep pursuing Blitz sexually from the vulgar remarks that he makes, but his real goal ultimately was being Blitz's boss. In the pilot, it was Stolas and not a client who asked Blitz to kill someone, and from what I've heard from behind the scenes info, the original story of Helluva Boss would have been largely about these missions that Stolas was sending Blitz on. While most of the missions that IMP goes on are rather personal and thus low profile, Stolas was having Blitz kill someone who was trying to convince people that global warming exists, hinting at Hell being responsible for slowly destroying the Earth. If the series had progressed as originally planned, the story would have likely led to Blitz and the IMP gang doing jobs that are way too high profile, risking exposing Hell, such as we've seen in the show with the Agents of Dorks, but with Stolas being the one pulling the strings. This dynamic would have been a lot more toxic than what we ended up getting, with Blitz in this version having to avoid sleeping with this guy who was always pushing them to do dangerous stuff just so Blitz could keep his business open. It takes the dynamic we got in the show we have, which involves the adult relations, but adds in this element of danger that the regular missions just don't have. This dynamic is not all that different from Angel and Valentino in Has-Been Hotel, which looks like one of VivziePop's favorite stories to work on in that show. Like Valentino, Pilot Stolas uses his sexuality as something of a weapon, seemingly wanting to make Blitz uncomfortable even, with sex being used as a threat against Blitz to end the conversation and make sure that Blitz does his mission. As when Blitz asks why Stolas wants more people dead, Stolas says it's because he gets lonely, and if he gets too lonely, he'll want to sleep with Blitz again. Episode 1 came with a massive shift for Stolas' character, having him turn from a villain to a more sympathetic character who was trying his best even if doing something wrong. And a lot of these changes were said to be inspired by Brandon Rogers. Brandon Rogers is of course the voice of Blitz, but also the co-writer of Helluva Boss. Before Helluva Boss, Brandon Rogers already had a very successful YouTube channel, and the Helluva Boss pilot is structured like one of his fast-paced, quick-cut comedy videos. A lot of Blitz's journey seems modeled after Brandon Rogers, something alluded to in the show with Blitz being mistaken for a Brandon Rogers ripoff when the gang goes to Hollywood. Blitz is a clown like one of Brandon Rogers' most popular characters, both being used to represent this sort of irony to fame, or in Blitz's case, the irony to fame in hell. Even Fizzarolli, as one of the most famous people in all 7 rings, is dressed very much like a clown, with this being seen as something attractive in hell for whatever reason. But the irony of this was always that these people are famous essentially for making a fool of themselves, for acting like a clown, and this becomes a layered part of Blitz's character. He achieved something close to fame in his childhood, but it was only because he was related to the more famous Barbie Wire and worked with the now megastar Fizzarolli. Blitz has a dream of becoming a more serious actor, and we see some of the decoration in his office referencing this, such as a poster featuring him in episode 1 that is similar to his poster with his sister. However, in this poster, he already has his white eye scar and he is alone. That means it was sometime after he burned down his family's circus, but it wasn't for his Lululand act that he would later end up at, where he was wearing a full clown getup. While there is a poster that may be for this in his office as well, Blitz seems less proud of his time at Lululand, where he became that ultimate clown that existed only to be laughed at for the wrong reasons. He was being outperformed by Robo Fizzarolli, a knockoff of the friend he couldn't compete with already. All of this plays into the complex relationship comedic actors have with their craft, where even successful megastars like Fizzarolli are still essentially just a clown that very few people truly appreciate. Supposedly, Brandon Rogers was the one who inspired the change of direction for Stolas, but regardless of who truly inspired that change, the show became, through him, this exploration of the modern world of fame and what it does to your psyche whether you find great success or a constant string of failures. Something that everyone in the Helluva Boss production team has some experience with in one way or another. And with that in mind, Stolas and Blitz's relationship evolved too, with Stolas becoming more of a sympathetic character, receiving a new personality and a new voice. Whereas the original Stolas had been using his sexuality almost as a weapon to keep Blitz assassinating his victims, this Stolas was just desperate for Blitz and was more interested in getting Blitz away from his work and into his life. Pilot Stolas didn't need his grimoire because it was more useful for him if Blitz had it, but our Stolas, as we have seen, is willing to give up the grimoire arrangement entirely to let Blitz run his business on his own. This positive change for Stolas explored a different idea of what a toxic dynamic is. Whereas Valentino shows how narcissistic people can abuse their power against people like Angel, Stolas showcased how empathetic people can still do the wrong thing, and thoroughly explored how that affected not just Blitz, but Stolas himself as well. Stolas isn't a celebrity in the way that Blitz wants to be, but he is put in the same camp as Asmodeus, whose relationship with Fizzarolli reflects Stolas' relationship with Blitz. Both Stolas and Asmodeus are royal Goetias with power and influence in hell, with Asmodeus more so living out the celebrity version of this. Stolas isn't famous in that same way, but he is known and really seems to go out of his way to avoid being in the spotlight, someone who could essentially be a star in hell but chooses to live a more private life. What we ultimately had here then was not just relationships where one figure is more powerful than the other, but one where that power is the specific kind of power that the other person wants. Fizzarolli himself ultimately became a celebrity because of figures like Mammon and Asmodeus, with Asmodeus giving Fizzarolli another chance at success even without Mammon's contract after the recent fallout between them. This is what Blitz wants, or at least wanted for himself, to be famous, to be known, and ultimately to be respected for that. He has since transitioned into being a hitman, which has led to him feeling respected by other imps such as Stryker when they comment on his success. Up until meeting Stryker, Blitz and our version of Stolas had still not connected very much on screen. Blitz saw Stolas as essentially gross, it would seem, but on some level he did seem to think that he was playing hard to get, if you will. Blitz acted like he could just barely tolerate Stolas at first, and while he was annoyed by him, we would later see in Season 2 that he felt enough empathy for Stolas to toss him a mercy lovemaking session before stealing his grimoire. Blitz had the option to just take the book without having any relation with Stolas, but he chose to do so because he ultimately felt for Stolas. With what we know now, Blitz seemingly just didn't want to admit, even to himself, how much he may have enjoyed Stolas' company, because he felt that eventually Stolas would get bored with him. Blitz had discussed with Fizzarolli that royals like Stolas and Asmodeus are incapable of loving imps like the two of them, and in the most recent episode, Blitz legit cries about how people like Stolas are always doing this to people like him. But what exactly happened here? Until the end of Season 1, there wasn't any real evidence that Blitz liked Stolas, and Episode 5 even hinted at Blitz rethinking his relationship with Stolas when Stryker points out that he's still just the pawn of another elite in Hell, masquerading as some sort of successful business imp because of it. In Episode 7, Blitz gave Stolas some false hope when he invited him to Ozzy's, but this was just to spy on Moxie and Millie. This would have been a disaster of a night already, but with Stolas and Blitz exposed to Ozzy and Fizzarolli, Blitz was left with the impression that Stolas saw Blitz purely sexually. However, in the much later received Episode 8, we would learn that Blitz ended up crying that night because he was afraid of ending up alone. Something about his interaction with Stolas had awakened this feeling in him. After that, fans weren't sure what Blitz and Stolas were doing. Season 2's premiere picked up on the same night as Episodes 7 and 8 of Season 1, with the episode mostly being flashbacks to how Blitz and Stolas actually met as children, completely recontextualizing their relationship. Even as children, however, Stolas was just crushing on Blitz, with Blitz doing his best to keep Stolas at arm's length and use him to get what he wants. Following this, Blitz and Stolas would play nice with each other when tracking down Octavia in Hollywood, with Stolas definitely still having attraction to Blitz here. Stolas would even try to get Blitz to rescue him from Stryker, but in not actually doing so, Blitz would begin to realize how much he cares about Stolas when Stolas almost ends up dead. Season 1 ended with him admitting that he didn't want to be alone, but he didn't seem sure about how he felt about Stolas in particular. Suddenly, the risk of losing Stolas permanently, to death, upset Blitz, and we see him making an effort to reach out, but apparently Blitz and Stolas haven't been seeing each other for a few months, possibly since the night at Ozzy's. According to the new episode, Full Moon, Stolas has been giving Blitz excuses not to meet up, with Blitz taking full advantage of them. However, after seeing Stolas rush to the hospital in a previous episode, Blitz seemed to have been looking forward to seeing him again. He and Stolas had been starting to get along a bit before that night at Ozzy's, and since then, he had time to think about Stolas and not wanting to lose him perhaps. But the most important thing weighing on Blitz's mind is the idea that Stolas is getting tired of him. Blitz had essentially hoped that a little time away would make Stolas want him even more, and he wants to go all out to make Stolas happy this night, with items we won't show in this video even though they were already censored in the episode. Everyone at the office is making jokes about Stolas beginning to pull away from Blitz, and he's beginning to worry about losing the success he has because of that. This success doesn't actually hinge very much on how good he is at his job, though business does seem to be legitimately booming. Instead, Blitz's success really hinges on whether or not Stolas continues to have an interest in him, whether he rationalizes that interest as just sexual or even possibly romantic, which is a much more complex thing to keep going. But Blitz seemed to prove in this episode that he really did not know just how serious Stolas had taken him. The episode was essentially a really fun, fluffy build-up to what we all knew was coming thanks to the trailer, the breakup of Stolas and Blitz. After thinking that Stolas was avoiding him because he was bored with their relationship, Stolas reveals that the real reason he finally invited Blitz back to his place was to give him the Osmodian crystal. This would allow Blitz to travel to Earth with ease, and fits right into his existing outfit. This should have been a gift that allowed Blitz to take off and focus on his business, while perhaps choosing to be in Stolas' life, but Blitz could not take it seriously. Blitz legitimately had what he needed to walk away from him, with the Osmodian crystal even legalizing his business venture under Osmodius himself. But when Stolas admits he wants Blitz to choose to stay with him, and he reveals his feelings, Blitz jumps straight to thinking that this is a roleplay. Now, neither character has great origins here. Blitz tried to steal Stolas' grimoire, and Stolas used the grimoire to force Blitz into a dynamic that he wanted. But when Blitz realizes that he actually hurt Stolas, he tries to give Stolas a second chance, by essentially asking for a second chance, albeit a bit angrily. Stolas' issue isn't that he misunderstood Blitz as rejecting him, but rather, Blitz's first impression of him was that Stolas' feelings were impossible to see as real. Stolas and Blitz don't talk to each other as much as we, the audience, talk about them together, and they haven't had a real night together in months. Stolas is trying to convince himself that he didn't absolutely ruin this with the way it had started. Blitz's response was honest. It wasn't mean or cruel or even ignorant. It was Blitz just assuming the only thing he could based on what they had experienced together. Stolas is a character who has been coming to terms with how he has projected this fantasy of Blitz himself onto Blitz without any real idea of what was going on in Blitz's head. You could argue that Blitz was using his own ignorance as a sort of coping mechanism and attempted to test the waters in case Stolas was putting on some act, not expecting Stolas to immediately shut down. And on some level, that may actually be true for Blitz. But on the surface, Blitz legitimately thought Stolas was just being sexual, and it fits with everything he's been saying to himself and to others like Fizz. What was heartbreaking to Stolas wasn't that Blitz couldn't be reasoned with into believing him eventually, but that Stolas had built up an entire lie about how Blitz was already seeing him. What Stolas had was not a relationship, but a roleplay, something that Blitz could not see as anything else because of how arranged it was. But when Blitz tries to angrily pull Stolas back in when realizing that he might actually have feelings for him, it only makes things worse. Now, Blitz is throwing Stolas a bit of an olive branch here. Yes, he is angry and insulting, and also projecting a bit when he equates Stolas with the general elites who use and abuse the lower classes. But he's ultimately giving Stolas a chance to just hear him out, and to let them work through their feelings. It's not noble when dressed up in these insults, but it's very human for a demon. However, when Blitz equates himself with Stolas' butler, that's when Stolas just doubles down. Blitz wasn't wrong in pointing out the similarity, but it reminded Stolas of the reason he had walked out of the room, the fact that Blitz didn't see any love in what he had done. And it's not because it wasn't there, but because what Stolas had done, ultimately, was not loving, it was controlling, even if it was done because he loved Blitz. In Blitz's mind, he wasn't much different from Stolas' butler, someone who was there to essentially serve Stolas, who Stolas is able to take advantage of because at the end of the day, Stolas has what both of them need, his power in hell, whether that translates into money so the butler can survive, or the grimoire so that Blitz can continue his business. And that is probably the killing blow to Stolas. Even when Blitz is reaching out, screaming that he may in fact be able to address his own feelings for Stolas if given the time to actually think about it, he does so by reminding Stolas that what he did wasn't just wrong, but the antithesis of what Stolas wanted. Stolas thought he was playing out Beauty and the Beast, making Blitz fall in love with him, and in a way, he had, but Blitz's coping mechanism for all of this was convincing himself that nothing Stolas did was with love. And that is a really harsh thing to learn about yourself in a relationship as complex as this one. In the end, neither of these characters are right, but both are people who ultimately mean well and are trapped in a world where meaning well means nothing, where taking advantage of others is the only way even the well-meaning people can get anything accomplished. They are people we see as good guys because they are on the inside. They're just trapped in a system that, even by their own good guy standards, has made them use and abuse each other. But what do you guys think? This has been one of the most emotionally interesting episodes of the entire show in my opinion, with every word Stolas and Blitz said to each other in their conversation having so much subtext to it. Every little sentence calling back to another episode, another moment we experienced with them, but that they didn't always experience with each other. We have such a beautiful look at what their relationship is from the outside, knowing how it developed not just in their world, but out of a different world before this that we got to see in the pilot. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and here's how I got my scars. Wow, I wonder who left these outside at the Cartoon Universe office. Weird, this one doesn't even look like me. I don't have freckles. Oh well, time for bed. And that's how I got my scars.